Welcome to the Student Ministry Podcast. My name is Steve Cullen, and I am so excited for you to be back here for another episode of this great thing that I get to do every month, to just talk with other youth workers and just talk about their ministry. I'm so glad that you're back and joining us today. Apologize for those of you that were expecting an actual interview last time and for episode 20, and you're like, what? It's just Steve talking the whole time? Sorry about that. I just felt like, maybe you guys wanted to hear my story, and so I wanted to dive into that. So we're back again with an actual interview this time, and maybe you missed it and you want to go back, check out episode 20. But this time we have Kenny and Elle Campbell. They are the founders and the primary people behind StuffYouCanUse.org. And if you're not into, if you don't know yet about this amazing resource for student ministry, make sure you check out their website. They were youth pastors in Buffalo, New York, and they've been working a little bit with Orange. And then they finally just went all out and now doing Stuff You Can Use full time. It's been great to get to know them over the last several years, and I'm just excited for you to hear our conversation today as we jump into a little bit about what God's been doing in their life and what it looks like to run this amazing website. They've got their own podcast and some other amazing things that they offer to student ministers and youth groups out there. So make sure you check out their stuff, and I hope you're excited to hear about, like I said, what God is doing in their life. But before we jump into that, we got to thank our sponsors because they are part of what makes this happen every time. And so we do want to thank WorkCamp NE. Their website is WorkCampne.com. And if you're looking for a mission trip opportunity for your students, middle school and high school, make sure you check out their website. They have camps running in Manchester, New Hampshire, and Beardstown, Illinois, and Johnston, Vermont, and Laconia, New Hampshire in 2018. So make sure you check them out. But here's a little known secret that what WorkCamp also does. They also run private camps. So if you're like, none of those really work out for me, but I do want to offer a service-based mission trip for my students, contact them and say, hey, you know what? The Student Ministry Podcast, Steve told me to tell you, I know you guys do this, so make sure you contact them and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking, and see what they can do for you. And we also want to thank our other sponsor. It's a combined sponsorship between the National Network of Youth Ministries and Reach Youth New England. Both of those organizations are all about connecting youth workers together. I just got back from DYM 100 this past week, and it was great just to connect with other youth workers. And so if you're not connected with your local network, between the National Network of Youth Ministries or Reach Youth New England, if you're in New England, make sure you definitely check out their websites. Youthworkers.net is the national network, and reachyouthne.com is the website for Reach Youth New England. So do yourself a favor, connect with other youth workers in your area so that you can really be better together and benefit each other's ministry, and so that we can do this even better for the kingdom of God. So with all that being said, thanks to all our sponsors, but let's now jump into this conversation with Kenny and Elle Campbell. All right, so thanks you so much for joining us today, Kenny and Elle.
Yes, Steve.
You're welcome.
Thanks
Excited
for having
to be here.
us.
Yeah, no problem. It's been really cool for me to get to know so many youth workers and over the years and hear their stories. But I'm particularly excited about your story because not only have you worked in the local church and you've done student ministry there, but you're also now resourcing a lot of student ministers and just helping us all out. So I'm excited to hear how God's done that in your life and how how you've come to where you are today. So let's just start right there in our conversation today, and tell me a little about what God has done in your life to bring you where you are today.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with my half of the story.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I grew up going to youth group, loved it, grew up in a Christian family. And I remember in middle school just really looking at my youth pastor and thinking that would be an incredible job to have. He gets to hang out with kids all day. He gets to came to our lunch and brought hamburgers, and I'm like, this is a cool dude.
I would love
to
hamburgers.
do that. Yeah, the hamburgers is really what sealed the deal.
That's what won it over, yeah.
Yeah. And so I ended up going to Liberty University. I came back home to Buffalo. We both grew up in Buffalo, New York, and started interning, got an intern position at a church. And that kind of turned into middle school pastor eventually. And that's where I met Elle. So Elle was attending that church, and I was brought on staff. And so that's kind of where we met. I don't know, Elle, did you have a youth pastor that brought you hamburgers that made you want to go into ministry?
No. Well, okay. So for me, I was like really active in my youth group growing up. The church that we both worked at is actually the church I grew up in. And so I spent the first 27 years of my life there and loved it. We actually got to see the church kind of grow from a youth group of maybe like 30 students up to, by the time we left, it was maybe like we probably had like 350 just middle schoolers each week. So it went through like a huge transition. But the thing for me is I actually did not anticipate going into ministry at all. In large part, I think because I didn't actually see any women doing meaningful ministry that kind of aligned with my skills and passions when I was growing up. Like if you looked at my church back then, the only things women were doing were like leading in children's ministry or like leading women's Bible studies or like leading the handbell choir or something. And none of those things were really my jam. So I just didn't even see it really as an option. What ended up happening for me is that when Kenny became the middle school pastor, my church had an opening for like a family ministry coordinator. So I was asked to take that role. So I was doing a lot with like marriage ministry and like family baptisms, things that kind of span birth through 12th grade. And I always thought that would just be like a temporary position. But kind of the more that I got into it, the more things I got to try, the more I realized like, oh, maybe ministry is something that I could do for the long term. So it's a little different for me. I kind of like stumbled into it by accident, in large part just because I didn't really see it modeled for me when I was a kid.
Yeah. But then eventually we both ended up working in middle school ministry together. And we loved it. We love what we did. Elle really focused on like the volunteers and the small group side of things. I focused more on the programming and the speaking and that side of stuff. And eventually we started creating resources for ourselves. We're both self-taught. And probably a lot of youth pastors are like this out there that are listening, because you may not have like a tech team or you may not have a graphic designer on staff. So you got to learn how to use all these programs. So we pretty much did. We learned Photoshop and InDesign and how to edit videos and how to edit audio and all this stuff. So it ended up working out well for us because we were able to create stuff for our ministry. And then we thought it would be fun to share that with other youth ministries that wanted to use anything that we made. So that's where Stuff You Can Use was born. So if you're not familiar, Elle and I have a website called stuffyoucanuse.org. And really how it started was just us creating things for our youth ministry, like our volunteer training materials and the events we were doing and our breakfast we did for our parents and like all the games we did. And so we just kind of like put all those things up on a website, Stuff You Can Use. And it turned into, now it's like our full-time career. So we kind of transitioned from being full-time youth pastors to now full-time we get to create stuff and make it available to youth pastors all around the world.
That's cool. Yeah, I remember. I think the very first time I met you guys was probably at an Orange conference, and I think you guys were leading a workshop about games for middle schoolers.
Yes,
and
that was fun.
It was fun, and it was cool. I can definitely tell your heart was not just to say, "Hey, these things worked for us, so we're going to keep them to ourselves." But hey, they worked for us, and we want you to share in it as well and take it. And if it works for your group, great. If you want to change it, go for it. And I could definitely tell that's been your heart kind of for a while now, and you can tell it in Stuff You Can Use as well. Was that modeled for you, or is that just kind of what you guys that was just came naturally, I guess, as you spent some time in ministry?
Yeah, well, I think, it for sure was modeled for us, and it really was like ingrained really in the culture of our church. So our church had sort of an interesting history where like when I was growing up, it kind of was like this exclusive kind of vibe. Like it didn't partner with other churches. It kind of was like, hey, this is what we're doing. We don't care about anybody else. And so when I was like in high school, we brought in a new lead pastor, and he started shifting that culture in some pretty big ways. And his name's Jerry Gillis. He's still there. And he's really done like a ton in the last like 15 years to really kind of build up like the capital C Church of Buffalo, to kind of get churches working together and partnering together. So yeah, I feel like I was really fortunate, and Kenny too, that throughout our entire ministry career, and even for me when I was a teenager, got to see that modeled in some pretty significant ways. And so by the time we were on staff, one of our core values as a church was partnering with the greater body of Christ. And so when we were there on staff, this was really encouraged for us, is like, hey, our church happens to have a lot of staff, a lot of resources, just, by the nature of, like, in a lot of ways, we kind of got lucky. Like, we happen to have a lot of stuff. And so it would be selfish of us to keep that to ourselves and to use that just for the building up just of our church. Let's think of ways that we can serve the church around the corner and the church down the street and the church in churches like throughout our county, but also throughout the country as well. So yeah, that was for sure modeled for us, and was a really big value. And we're pretty like fortunate that we got to kind of be under that model of leadership, because, it's just, we love it.
It was very open-handed, and like they even allowed us as part of our job to actually run Stuff You Can Use. So They were like, hey, we know you guys are creating great stuff, and like we really value the partnership with other churches. So go ahead and like, during, don't use all your time to do this, but as you create things, go ahead and make a website and make them available. And so we got to like really kind of get our experience and build some of the community even while we were working at the church and with their approval. So it was a really cool opportunity.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's especially cool, like that your church was, endorsing it and giving you that safe place to like play around with that and see how it goes, and realize, you're still employed here. We'll still support you, but we're going to give you this opportunity to be that resource if God does and indeed bless it. So that's pretty cool. And it's definitely, one of our sponsors of the podcast is the National Network of Youth Ministries, and so we've talked a lot over the years on the podcast about the importance of working together. It's so incredibly important that we're there for each other, even across denominational lines, and just realizing that we want to focus on the really important things, Jesus and reaching teenagers and their families for Jesus. And if we can do that together, we're only going to be better for it.
Totally. Love that.
Cool. So next question I have for you revolves around your ministry. So if you want to, you can talk a little bit about what your ministry looked like there in Buffalo, but I'd really like to hear like what's a day-to-day life like and stuff that you can use, because this is now your full-time gig. So what's that look like? What's God doing in your ministry as it now looks like too? Yeah.
Well, for most of our professional life, for most of our career, like it's always been a side project for us. So Stuff You Can Use was always something we were able to give, a little bit of our time to. And, we'd create things every once in a while and make them available. We were able to start the Stuff You Can Use Facebook group while we were still doing it as like a side project. And now it has almost 8,000 youth workers in it, which is like insane and crazy. We were able to start the Youth Ministry Answers podcast. And so it's kind of like, slowly evolved over the years as we've been able to create more things. And then recently, though, we were like, all right, we're finally at a place where it looks like we could, sustain ourselves off of this. And it would be fun to kind of not have a boss anymore and like be able to have complete creative freedom and like, do whatever we want and like be able to do it from anywhere. So we're like, maybe we should try this out and like try to go all in. So we made the decision in January to actually jump in and do Stuff You Can Use full time. So since then, our day to day has been completely different than usual, because usually it's like, hey, we're working for a church or we're working for Orange, and we're like, had a full time job along with it. But now that we're full in, it's really fun, and we get to work with and partner with a lot of youth pastors and youth workers all around the country and really all around the world. And so kind of like what happened was when we first launched Stuff You Can Use, we were thinking like, okay, what do we want to do? Like we want to create something that would be as helpful as possible to the most amount of people. And that's where we kind of came up with the idea for Grow. And so we launched this curriculum in May called Grow Curriculum, and it's also like a full annual strategy. So right now our day-to-day is just kind of helping youth pastors plan their entire years out. So we kind of go through everything from August all the way through the fall, winter, spring, and summer, and think through what are you doing for your volunteer training? How are you connecting with parents? What do your events look like? And all of that. So we've created all those resources, put it into the subscription. And so day to day, we're just creating resources and trying to help youth pastors get better at what they do.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, Grow really is kind of our main focus at this point. We're still doing podcasts and doing blog posts and all that stuff, but Grow is the biggest deal for us because our hope. And actually, let me expound a little bit on like where this came from. Back in January, when we decided to go full time, we asked all of like our Stuff You Can Use community to tell us what their biggest struggle in youth ministry was, and we got hundreds of responses back. But really, the number one issue that we saw from youth pastors had to do with either attendance or engagement of their students. Is that the big issue and biggest worry is like, hey, I feel this pressure to grow my numbers. I feel this pressure to like get my attendance numbers up. Like, what am I going to do? And kind of this, we really came from this conversation Kenny and I had of, okay, if we were to sit down with all these youth pastors who feel this pressure of growing their numbers, what would we say? And we kind of landed on, hey, we understand the pressure of growing your numbers, but that's not really the point. And I think as youth pastors, we all know that, but we still feel the pressure. Yeah. But if we do ever want to grow numerically, we can't get there by doing quick fixes of like giving away Xboxes or doing a big school event and just trying to like drag kids through the door. The only way that we're really going to grow sustainably and deeply in the long term is to create healthy systems throughout all of our ministry. And so that's really where Grow came from, is like, hey, we can't give quick fixes. We don't want to give quick fixes. How do we help youth pastors create really healthy, successful strategies and systems that help them in every area of their ministry? So that's been a really fun challenge for us. And it really kind of, we got to sort of be like pretend youth pastors again, because we got to plan out like an entire year of ministry for basically an imaginary youth ministry. Yeah. And it was really fun. It was a fun new challenge and allowed us to kind of really go back to our roots of what we would be doing and what we wish we could be doing right now if we were youth pastors full time. So it's fun. We love it. Just trying to figure out ways to solve problems for people is basically what we do.
That's cool. I was just thinking this week, like going into a new ministry. I've only been here for like 2.5 months now, and there's so many things and planning out the year and all that stuff that I know I need to do, but it just takes time, and you know, have the regular daily grind of actually doing the ministry and planning it all at the same time. And that sounds great, just to be able to sit back and plan it without the daily grind. That sounds fantastic.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Yeah. So what's it like? I mean, do you get a chance to break these lessons and the curriculum and stuff like that you're writing with a youth group, or are you kind of just writing to that imaginary group and hoping it works? How's that work?
Yeah, well, we knew going into it, we didn't want to write it all. Like, you know, we wanted to make sure we had a really diverse group of people speaking into it. So we actually were able to get like over 30 different youth workers and church leaders to help us from all different church sizes, from all different contexts, like leaders from urban churches and rural churches and suburban. And we even have people from different countries, like youth workers from the UK and Mexico and Australia. And so we really were able to get this really cool, diverse mix of contributors. I think over 50% of them are women, over 50% of them are people of color. And so we were like, we really want to make this as flexible and as usable as possible in as many different types of scenarios. So we did have, you know, a lot of different youth groups using it and thinking about it and helping us shape it. And it's not just the curriculum that they helped with, but also the leader meetings and the parent communication pieces and the events. And so, like, really holistically, your entire youth ministry, we had all these great leaders kind of like helping us put it together. And so that was really fun too. Like, it's just so fun. And we love collaboration. We love, you know, getting the ideas and voices of other people. And even as a youth pastor, that's one thing that I valued a lot. I was, you know, the lead communicator to our youth group, but I tried really hard to get as many different people on stage to help communicate, or even maybe be someone I would interview if I was communicating, or come up and tell a story. Because I just think it's so important for students to not just hear the same person's perspective every single week. Right. It's so healthy and so valuable for our students if they hear, you know, a wide variety of perspectives and backgrounds, and, you know, holistically, it's just better for them. So it was really fun to be able to have that group of people help help contribute to what we were doing.
Yeah, and we're excited for that too, just for a youth pastor's development, because, sometimes we get in this rut as youth pastors of like doing similar things over and over again, just because that's what we know, it's what we like, it's kind of what our style is. And so one of the things we're most excited about is that having this huge, diverse group of people who are writing the weekly talks and like the small group questions and all that stuff will hopefully give youth pastors like some different tastes of different styles and different approaches of writing and preparing and delivering talks, so that youth pastors can try new things and find out like things that work for them and things that don't. So we try to make everything really customizable and really flexible, so that, when you look at it and you're like, this isn't going to work for me, but that's okay. It's easy to change. Or, hey, this is something I've never tried before. Let me try it and see how it goes. So we're excited about that. We love the idea of kind of challenging ourselves as leaders and as communicators to, just be trying new things to be more effective and more innovative and not get stuck in a rut. So hopefully this helps some folks do that.
That's cool. Yeah, I love that idea. I mean, even what you've done, and maybe hopefully, I think this was probably on purpose, but you've really, in that way, been able to give other youth workers the same opportunity that you were given to share their resources and share their expertise and be able to give back to the youth ministry community as well. So that's really awesome to be able to share that responsibility among all of us. So it's like it's coming from all these different areas, but you're all going at the same unified vision.
Yeah.
Yes. And actually part of that, what you said is exactly right. Like, and we didn't want to necessarily just invite all the famous youth pastors to contribute, because there's like all the people we know that are like the youth pastor celebrities out there that we could ask to like be a part of it. But we were looking for like youth workers that don't have a platform, that they're doing amazing things in these really interesting contexts, but they don't have a place to share what they're doing. So that was part of what we were looking for too, is to give some new up and coming, or like not even up and coming, but like seasoned veteran people as well, an opportunity to share what they've been able to learn and do over the last few years.
That's cool. Yeah. That's actually, it's so cool, because it's one of the reasons I started this podcast, because I was like, there's awesome stories out there that people need to hear. And maybe they don't get the platform that some people do, but God's doing some awesome stuff through other ministries, and we need to share those stories and we need to celebrate them.
Absolutely.
So do you guys get a chance to still volunteer in student ministry at all, or is it pretty much just stuff you can use?
Yeah, we do get to volunteer, which is so fun. We volunteer at a church called Brownsbridge here in Georgia, and we serve as small group leader coaches in the middle school ministry there. So, we're volunteers, but we oversee other volunteers, small group leaders, and get to invest in them and help them and kind of give them some practical training and advice as they're trying to figure out how to be small group leaders to middle schoolers, which is quite the job. And we've been there, so we get to kind of help them figure that out and navigate those waters. Actually, in just a few days, we're going to be spending the weekend at our church's 7th and 8th grade weekend fall camp called Frequency. So we'll be kind of pouring into small group leaders and helping them troubleshoot all of the craziness that comes with a weekend full of middle schoolers. And yeah, we get to do that. We love it. In a lot of ways, it's some of the things that we got to do as youth pastors back at our last church. But, without the responsibility of being there for 40 hours a week. So it's great. It's great.
My mentor and I, from my resident ministry back several years ago, often said to ourselves, we would be the best volunteers out there. Because it'd be great just to volunteer in ministry and not have to worry about all the other stuff attached to it. I mean, that it's there, whether you want it or not, it's there. So
yeah, it was definitely an adjustment, but we're having fun with it. We love it. We love it a lot.
That's really cool. So let's talk some tips and tricks. I'm sure you guys have learned a ton of stuff over the years that God's taught you, and through ministry and through being a resource to others. But if you could narrow it down to like maybe 2 or 3 different tips that, even if you could kind of go back in time, if that was possible, to tell yourselves 10, 15 years ago, hey, if you did this, it would actually set you up better for success. And that maybe other youth workers out there could benefit from that wisdom. So do you got some tips for us?
Sure. Well, I have a real life story of being a youth pastor where I learned some stuff on the spot. Boy. So when I was first a youth pastor.
Is this the Santa Claus story?
No, this isn't the Santa Claus story.
Don't tell middle schoolers Santa doesn't exist.
That's also another tip, is do not reveal or deny the existence of Santa Claus.
Don't even talk about it.
I wish that I could say that I never talked about Santa, but I've been there. Yeah.
But actually, what I realized as a youth pastor is before I had any other staff on my team, which probably most youth workers are like that, right? We're either on our own or maybe even doing it bivocationally. Like there's not always like a team to help support us. And so I was leading the middle school ministry and really focusing mostly on Sundays, like focusing on our weekly program. And what I wasn't doing was really supporting and caring for our volunteers. And I didn't realize that. I was young in ministry, and I thought, we have lots of kids coming. It's really fun. The messages are engaging. The worship band is cool. But what I didn't realize in the whole process was our volunteers didn't feel cared for. Our volunteers never really got the support and the training they needed. And so what happened was one Sunday morning, we had like 85 middle school boys, but only 2 adults showed up that morning.
Wow.
And that's when I realized, I'm like, all right, if these middle school boys realize what's happening, they could overthrow the entire program and have like a mutiny on their hands. And so that's when I was like, shoot, I really need to figure out how to invest into my volunteers. And that's really, part of why we created Grow the way we did was we give all of our users help in all of these areas. Like we give them help in 6 different areas: teaching, games, events, parents, volunteers, and what was the last one? I don't know. I forget off the top of my head.
Discipleship?
Discipleship. Yeah.
Cool.
The most important one, Kenny.
Yeah. And we believe the reason why it's so important to have something that supports you in all 6 of those is you're not going to be good at all 6.
Right.
Like I was good at maybe the teaching and the games, but I wasn't good at parents and volunteers. So I really needed some help in that area. So I would say one of the tips I have for youth pastors out there is to identify what your weak spots are and either bring someone alongside of you that can help with that. Like maybe you can bring on even a volunteer that will help you with parents, or a volunteer that will help coordinate your other volunteers, or whatever your weak spot is. But identify your weak spots and try to find someone to help you with those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Obviously, I agree with all that. One thing I would add / maybe expand on that Kenny just touched on is I think the best tip that I can give to a youth pastor is to give away ministry opportunities to volunteers. And this has kind of been like my soapbox rant from the beginning. Actually, once I literally did a soapbox rant at a conference once about this. But it's like, as youth pastors, and I saw this modeled when I was growing up, unfortunately, that sometimes there's this tendency to like be the rock stars of our youth ministries, like the people who do everything. We want to be the people who like disciple every kid, who are there for all of their big moments, who are like the ones that, when kids get older, they're like, oh man, my youth pastor personally like discipled me. But the reality is, if we have that mentality that we want to be like the person for every single kid in our ministry, we're going to cap our ministry's effectiveness. We're going to cap our ministry's numbers because we can't actually invest in that many people. So the way around that, the way to actually make our ministry effective is to empower volunteers in significant ways to do ministry, to be there for those big moments, because we can't do it all on our own and we shouldn't. And so really it's just kind of seeing our role as youth pastors as more than just pastoring kids. Our role is to empower and equip volunteers to do ministry, because when we do that, we actually expand our influence, expand the influence of the church, and allow more kids to be discipled and ministered to in significant ways. Yeah,
and actually, like we mentioned earlier, one of our church's core values was partnership with the greater body. We had 4 core values. One of them was partnership with the greater body, which is how we were able to create stuff you can use. And the other one, another one was interdependent leadership. And it was all about what Elle just said, was giving away ministry and not trying to do everything yourself. So really, we were looking for volunteers to lead every aspect of our ministry, like Can we find a volunteer to lead our greeter team? Can we find a volunteer to lead our cafe team? Can we find a volunteer to, be coaches for our small group leaders and volunteers to communicate and help us with events? And so really, we tried to empower volunteers as much as possible in our ministry to really let them use their gifts and give them the opportunity. And when you do that, they feel more ownership, and then the ministry is not hanging on you. So we got called away and we're no longer serving there, but the ministry was still thriving and growing even after we left because of the systems and structures that were in place.
Yeah. And I think when you do that as a youth pastor, when you empower volunteers like that, you don't have no idea the kind of impact that you're making. For me, I think the reason I'm in ministry today is because when I was a volunteer small group leader, my youth pastor told us that as small group leaders, we were actually the youth pastors of the kids in our small group. And so that really changed, was a huge perspective shift for me, and was something I wanted to instill in my volunteers, is that you guys aren't just people who show up and do a stupid job, push buttons on the PowerPoint, but you're actually pastoring people, and that's a really big deal. We just don't know the impact that that's going to have, and kids need it. Kids need more people than just us. They need more voices than just ours.
Definitely. Yeah, that's great stuff. Yeah, I've learned so many, sometimes through the hard times, a lot of times through my wife, who is very gifted in that area, who's able to point out those weaknesses in me and realize, hey, I need to be empowering and encouraging my leaders as well. And and that's something that I personally realized recently, leaving a church, that I'm glad that I had been taught that early on, because that ministry is still thriving under volunteer leadership right now, because they haven't hired a replacement. And they're still able to keep going because the people there they felt empowered to keep on doing the ministry, and it didn't have to revolve all around me because in the end, who am I? I'm just another guy. But when the church is able to really capitalize on their gifts and really pour into the body, it looks so beautiful. It's awesome to just sit back and watch God's people do God's work.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. Any other tips or anything that you'd like to share before we close up?
One other thing I would say is, if you're not connected to the other youth pastors and youth workers in your area, is to reach out and find them. And even if it's not an official youth pastor network in your area, but there's just so much great community out there in the youth pastor world that we can help each other and share ideas. And it doesn't mean you have to do events with other churches or anything, but really just that friendship and those relationships with the other youth workers that are in your local area. That was really helpful to me, just encouraging. And, I was able to learn a lot from the other guys and girls that were serving in our local area, and I loved it. And in Buffalo, where we were, there's still a very strong network of youth pastors up there. And so if you don't have one, maybe you could start one. And if there is one in your area, get plugged in.
Yep. Yeah, I think the last thing I would say is just make it fun, not only for students, but for volunteers to serve with you. We probably do that pretty well for students already, but make things fun for volunteers to be there too. When you have fun together, everything is just better, guys. Yep. It's just fun to laugh.
Definitely.
And have fun. Do it.
Cool. So thank you guys so much again for joining us today on the podcast. I'm sure people are going to want to know all about you and where they can connect with you guys online. Of course, check out your resources and everything. Where's the best place for them to go to find all about you and what you can offer to their student ministries?
Yeah, first thing I would say is, if you want to check out Grow Curriculum, that's pretty much where we're putting all of our efforts these days, is into our Grow Curriculum and strategy, and that's growcurriculum.org. And you can also find a whole bunch of other stuff that we do at stuffyoucanuse.org. So those are kind of the two places. That's where really you can get plugged into our Facebook group and find all the resources that we have available. I really am not active on social media or anything, so it's not even worth it to follow me on Instagram or whatever. I post once every 6 months.
I would say the best places on social media to connect with us are, number one, join the Facebook group, which you can find by searching for Stuff You Can Use, a youth ministry community, and follow us on Instagram, because we post stuff every day, at least once, helpful things and fun things and encouraging things. So, yeah.
Cool. And I just have to ask, because I've just been curious about this all along since I follow both of you guys on social media, is like, how do you explain how to follow yourself? Because you have a lot of letters in there. Like, do you count them out, or how do you tell them how many L's are there?
Guys, listen, here's the thing. If you want to follow me on social media, like personally, you really have to work for it. So my handle on Instagram is E and then 18 L's and then another E. So like Elle it's very annoying. I guess my philosophy is, I don't know. I just like to make it kind of torturous to follow me. It just weeds out people who don't really want to be my friend.
Nice.
That's what I've got.
You brought Kenny along for it, and just
I did.
Well, I just copied Elle because I'm not very creative.
Right.
So it's just Kenny with 9 N's. I thought 9 N. It's like an alliteration a little bit. Yeah. So Kenny 9 N's. There you go.
There you go. Oh, cool. So thank you guys so much. It's been a blast just to chat with you for a little bit today, and it's been cool just to hear your story and what God's doing in your ministry, and as you are able to minister to other youth workers out there. Thank you for all you guys do.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for having us.
Well, as always, I hope you all enjoyed that conversation just as much as I did. Kenny and Elle are fantastic. They're so full of energy and excitement for student ministry, and they just provide an awesome resource for all of us. And so if you haven't checked out their websites, make sure you do so. Check out their podcast and follow them on social media as well. It'd be a great follow and a great resource to your ministry, I'm sure. And make sure you share this with others, because I know, things like this don't get out unless we actually share them. And so if you like what you've heard today and you're like, you know what, I got someone else that really needs to hear this message, really needs to hear about this resource, really needs to hear about what God's doing in the world, because sometimes it gets kind of bogged down by all the negative stuff and everything, right? Especially here lately. It's been a lot of negative stuff in the media and everything, but to hear about what God is doing in the midst of that and what He's doing in the lives of these people and how they're still working and they're still making a great impact for God in the world today, in these students' lives and these families' lives. So make sure you share that, share the love. And if you do like it, if you like this sort of podcast, you like this format, do me a favor and leave a positive comment on one of the podcatchers out there, whether it be iTunes or Podbean or Stitcher or TuneIn Radio or whatever you use to subscribe to this podcast. Just leave a little comment. That'd be awesome. And it helps us just kind of rise to the top, and so other people can find it as well. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you want to connect with the Student Ministry Podcast, we are on Twitter. It's StuMinPod, so everything's abbreviated, STUMINPOD. And you can also follow me on Twitter at Steve Cullum, and I would love to hear what your thoughts are of the podcast, but also if you have someone else that you would say, I got to get them on the podcast. They've got an awesome story, and the world needs to hear about this story. Make sure you let me know, and I would love to get them on there as well. So thanks again for tuning in to the Student Ministry Podcast, and until next time, may God bless your ministry.